Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, I should say. It's just past 6 o'clock in the evening on the 18th, and intentionally I wanted to do this video yesterday to celebrate President's Day, but unfortunately we got caught up in some technical issues. We're doing some upgrading to the podcast. We've just integrated share microphones because unfortunately the previous audio kind of had my voice kind of tinny, and it didn't reflect the real robustness of which my voice is. So this is a very good upgrading. So assuming that we're now yesterday, but for the most part, I wanted to go and just have my own personal commentary about the presidency. I've had a very limited direct impact to the presidency, but very meaningful, and I'll share that later on. So, but I do, as I've said before, I love my country. I think that as I love my country as I love my faith. It gives me a great deal of sustenance because I've served both. I've served my faith and I've served my country. And I take a great deal of pride in that, not in the prideful sense that, pride is the source before you take the fall, but more of just a reckoning that in the service to my country, to the service of my faith, it gave me a great deal of satisfaction. And, you can't take away that from me. So, as we now proceed, I'd like you now, if you would, to please rise for our national anthem. That was brought to us by the official United States Army Band within the Military District of Columbia. Now, the Air Force has a counterpart to that. There is an Air Force District of Columbia, and I'm sure they have their own band as well. One of the things, I was a poli-sci major while I was at the Air Force Academy, and I think that one of the things that we do cross my mind every once in a while is the idea of being the President of the United States. The President of the United States is designated in the Constitution as being a Commander-in-Chief. Now, the term Commander-in-Chief was not uniquely American. Actually, it was derived from the British. The British used that title among their military officers that they were, and of course the Queen or the King, being the sovereign, was Commander-in-Chief of all the armed forces of the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland. So the idea of Commander-in-Chief, but the idea of President of the United States. So, of course, there are several perks to being president, but I'm going to take a privilege and I'm going to swear myself in as president, even in my own fantasy world. So as I am prepared to raise my right hand, and I do know the oath of office by memory. So if you will bear with me, Mr. Fellow, are you ready to take the oath of office? Sir, yes, I am. Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Albert Linus Fellow, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help me God. Now, of course, many of you recognize that song is called Hail to the Chief. The song has a rather unique history. Like our Star Spangled Banner, it actually was derived from a song with the same melody but different lyrics. And, of course, I think starting with the presidency of John Tyler, it was kind of used as the official President's March as intro for official state events. Of course, now the song is synonymous with the presidency. There is, however, an official song for the vice president. It is called Hail Columbia. And that was actually kind of our pre-presidential song before. That song was frequently used kind of as a presidential intro until Hail to the Chief came in there. Interestingly enough, Hail to the Chief does have lyrics with it that, of course, we're always hearing the instrumental part of it, but there is lyrics to the song to that, and we'll kind of get into that later on. But, of course, as Ronald Reagan commissioned me into the Air Force, unfortunately, he did die in, I believe it was 2004, and as part of the funeral, as was with every state funeral for a president, the song Hail to the Chief is both played as he enters into the Capitol to lay in state in the rotunda, and then when he departs the rotunda. So this was the scene from Ronald Reagan's funeral as he was departing from the rotunda of the Capitol and his funeral in June of 2004.
Now, praise that hope!
Okay, so a couple things real quick. First of all, the president is afforded a 21-gun salute as per his position as being the commander-in-chief. The U.S. Military District of Columbia actually fires those same, I believe those are 105 howitzers, but they're fired actually 50 times each 4th of July to celebrate the birth of the nation, one round for each state, obviously. And then upon the death of a president, there are 50 rounds that are fired. But clearly he gets the 21-gun salute. In addition, you can see that prior to the actual playing of Hail to the Chief, there are 4 stanzas, dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun. Okay, that's a very poor imitation, but that is actually called Ruffles and Flourishes. And it is like the precursor to Hail to the Chief. Now, depending on certain levels of officers, for example, a Air Force Brigadier General or what we call the flag ranks in the military. So what used to be addressed as a Commodore in the Navy now typically is Rear Admiral lower half, Rear Admiral upper half, but depending on your rank. So a one-star flag officer gets 1 ruffle, 2 gets 2, 3 gets 3, 4 gets 4. But the commander-in-chief as well as the vice president are always afforded 4 ruffles before their song. Now, the other thing I wanted to comment on is just looking at Nancy Reagan. Nancy Reagan was a little thing, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. And to be held up by that, I believe he was an Army 2-star general. He was the commander of the military district of Columbia. And I don't know his name, but he really did a great job throughout that entire funeral. I mean, just so respectful and so supportive. And, I think it does the nation a great honor to be that person, but to be that level of personal support for a grieving widow, especially as a widow of a former president, has really got to be something else. And whoever that person is, sir, I salute you. Well done. And let's take it from there. All right. So going forward, I mean, there are certain things that we are familiar with the presidency. Obviously, that is the seal and what we call the standard. And let's just go over them real quick. The seal, obviously, we're very familiar with the seal because not only is it on, let's say, in front of presidential podium when the president addresses the nation. It is not done, however, in the Congress when the president gives the State of the Union address. That rostrum is that of the House, and therefore there is no seal that is played, even though he's addressing the nation with that. The seal was actually developed as a reconfiguration of the presidential standard by Harry Truman. There had been a previous seal where it was the eagle, and then there were 4, I believe, it was on a blue field, and there were 4 giant stars, 1 in each corner. However, the presidential seal was reconfigured, as it were, by Harry Truman. And as you can see, it has the eagle of the United States. It has the armor of the United States. It has the E pluribus unum. It also has the 13, I call them the bulbs, but there are 13 of them there, as well as it's surrounded by 50 stars representing the 50 states. Of course, you see the seal on the side of whatever plane he's flying on that will serve as Air Force One, either tail 28,000 or 29,000. The presidential standard was also reconfigured in that that also had, as I said before, there were the 4 white stars, but of course now it has the improved seal. Now, the interesting thing is that in the talons, right, is that in the left talon, as the eagle is looking forward, is the olive branch with the 13 olives there. And then the right talon is the one with the 13 arrows. Now, obviously, it's to symbolize that the American nation looks for peace always, but it also demonstrates to the world it has the ability to fight and defend itself. So that's something that, we need to always constantly be reminded of. Of course, getting back to Hail to the Chief, the Marine Corps has the president's own, and this will be the president's own playing Hail to the Chief. Then this was done in an auditorium and not at the White House, but just the same. Again, just a beautiful sight to see. As an aside, that's one thing that I really, of all the things that I dreaded in the Air Force career, was our uniforms. We never had the uniforms to the standards of the Marines. I mean, the Navy, they were always pretty cool. The Army, they had their deal, but Air Force uniforms were just so drab and unimpressive. Even what we call our mess dress uniforms were, until they changed the color. We used to have white jackets and black pants, and we'd look like waiters that you would find at a high-end restaurant instead of military service officers. Okay, but again, that was Hail to the Chief by the United States Marine Corps President's own band. All right, so as I said before, yes, Hail to the Chief actually comes with lyrics, and I'm going to play them for him, but if you would pay attention in our rather diverse and almost cutthroat Washington, D.C., just look for the lyrics, and then you'll see my point. So, Hail to the Chief with lyrics. Okay, it was the lyric, as we seek cooperation, and I cannot believe in any other time, especially now in Washington, D.C., that the Democrats would cheer the current president. I mean, I heard a joke one time that said that if President Trump found the cure for cancer, it would be reported in the Washington Post that with the discovery of this new cure that the president is, basically throwing out of work tens of thousands of health professionals throughout the nation. I mean, you just can't find good news anymore. But again, going forward, the presidency certainly has its own perks. So let's talk about where the boss lives. I mean, we afford him the White House. The White House is built both as the official residence of the President of the United States as well as his official work area. And I'll go into a little bit more briefing in terms of the West Wing because, as John Kennedy said, he described the presidency as being the center of all action. Well, in a very real sense, the White House is really the center of action when it comes to Washington, D.C. Understanding, yes, we have a Capitol and a Supreme Court, but I think there's probably no other place that's covered more intensely. As much as people like to say they cover Congress, they cover the White House even more. So, of course, the White House was built as a result of slaves. It was completed in 1800. John Adams was the first president to live there, although George Washington laid the cornerstone as a Freemason. The building has been rehabbed several times, but the most extensive refurbishment was actually done in the administration of Harry Truman. there was a quote that the building was being held up surely by the force of habit. It was burnt by the British in the War of 1812. It was rebuilt several times, but at this point, it just had to be. So Truman made a historical decision to keep the outer walls intact, and they literally had to go and dismantle equipment, pour it through the exposed windows to be able to put in an all-steel girdering. I mean, it was literally built from the inside out, but the outer surfaces, as it were kept intact. The White House has officially 6 floors, 2 sub-basements. It has the first floor, the residence. Then there's a second a floor on top of the residence, but there's a total of 6 floors. It has a total of 55,000 square feet. Now, interesting enough, as big as the White House complex is, and it sits upon a landmass of approximately 19 acres, Buckingham Palace, in comparison, has 800,000 square feet in that building and could literally fit 14 and a half White Houses in that. So just as a comparison. The structure on the right that's in beige, that is what is known as Blair House. That is the official residence of guests of the United States of America. And it has a rather unique history. If you watch the movie Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis as President Lincoln, there's a line in there where he says he asks his secretary to go and to reach out to Preston Blair, that the president wants to call on Mr. Blair. Now, Mr. Blair was one of the original originators of the Republican Party, and what Lincoln was trying to do was to try to negotiate some sort of peace with the Confederates. So he sent Preston Blair on a mission to go to Richmond to speak directly to Jefferson Davis. Now, those buildings that you see next to them actually are part of what they call the Blair House complex. That complex is actually bigger than the White House as far as square footage is available. The other unique thing about Blair House is that Blair House was the scene of a murder. Back in 1950, there were 2 Puerto Rican nationalists that attacked Blair House in an attempt to assassinate President Truman. And there was a uniformed Secret Service agent that was on patrol outside of Blair House, whose name was Leslie Kofelt. Well, Leslie managed to fire a weapon, killing one of the terrorists, but in the process was killed himself. He, to my memory and to that of the Secret Service, is the only active duty Secret Service employee that was killed in defense of the president. Now, Truman was upstairs in a back room sleeping. He did not know about the attack until afterward. And I understand that in the basement of Blair House, there's kind of a day room for the agents for them to be able to utilize, and that was named after Leslie Kofelt. But that entire complex. Now, included in that also is a residence for former presidents when they visit Washington, D.C., where they can stay as guests of the United States government. Now, they cannot live in the White House, obviously, that's for the current president. But the fact of the matter is that there is a separate designated area. I think Richard Nixon started that, and that's where they go and they keep them. So just a little bit interesting there. Of course, going forward, we are familiar with this beautiful, beautiful thing, as well as this beautiful thing as well. So for those of you who, let me move that over. So, okay, well, the first one is now the aircraft that is only identified as Air Force One when the president is officially on board. Now, the designation of Air Force One is a presidential call sign. It is not the plane itself. The plane itself is designated as either Angel 1 or Angel 2. And if you look on the tail number, this one is tail number 28,000. The other one corresponding is 29,000. That's what they are called when they are on the ground. Now, when they are utilized in a mission, such as a presidential funeral, let's say a president has died and they have to fly somewhere to retrieve the president to bring him back to Washington, D.C., it is called SAM, Special Air Mission. In this case, it would be SAM 28,000. The only time Air Force One has changed its call sign literally in mid-flight was when Richard Nixon resigned. He was still president of the United States when he left on Air Force One to go back to California. According to his pilot, Colonel Ralph Abersy, I think his name was, somewhere over Kansas City, literally over the heartland of the America. It was right at noon. President Ford had been inaugurated as president. He'd been officially sworn in. And at that point, the plane that was identified as Air Force One was radioed in. The pilot asked Central to recall sign them. He was calling them, the recall sign was SAM. I believe it was 26,000. They were using the John F. Kennedy plane. That plane eventually, the 26,000 plane that Kennedy had used for the majority of his presidency was actually, or all of his presidency, I should say, because he was the inaugural president on that particular plane, was retired to the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. You can actually see, you can get on that plane, you can see, and it was configured and how it was predominantly for the Kennedy years. Now, of course, the new Air Force One has yet to be delivered. This Air Force One is a Boeing 747-200 model, and it is, to the best of my knowledge and the best of my research, the only 747-200 that is still used in a passenger role. The last two in the world. These planes are over 30 years old. Now, you say 30 years old. God, it doesn't look a day over 10. Yes, they're extremely well-maintained aircraft. I mean, it is the golden touch. But it is an aircraft. They use up parts, and the parts are becoming increasingly harder and harder to come by. Of course, we are still waiting for the arrival of the new Air Force One, which will be a 747-8 model. It will actually be 1,000 square foot more. This Air Force One is 4,000 square feet. The new Air Force One is actually 5,000 square feet in the aircraft. I mean, it's going to be a monster, but it's for the commander-in-chief. So where the boss goes, there goes the plane. Of course, the Marine One over there is a Sea King, a Sikorsky Sea King model. They've also been around for a long, long time, and they are also in the process of being replaced. The problem is that we have a problem with these particular newer models is because if you can see the small circle, and you can see, I'll point out with the mouse. Come on, mouse. My mouse has been a little bit irritable lately. Okay, so right here, you can see that little black hole. Well, there's two of them. Those are exhaust for the engines. The problem is on the new aircraft, those are actually pointed down, and when the aircraft lands, it will literally burn the White House lawn. So they got to figure out a way to get that before the president uses it. He has been seen using it on other missions, but not the White House lawn. There are approximately, I believe, 30 Marines in VX-1 is the Marine Corps squadron designation for that, and they are responsible for providing all of the helicopter airlift for both the president and the vice president. So, you're riding in style. All right, so now let's check out these next two items, also signs of the office. The picture on the left is Camp David. Camp David was originally called Shangri-La when it was acquired by the federal government during the administration of Franklin Roosevelt. When President Eisenhower came into office, he had a very young grandson by the name of David Eisenhower, which I believe was the son of his own son, John Eisenhower. Well, David liked to party with Grandpa, as it were, and as a result of that, Eisenhower said, you know what, we're just going to call this Camp David instead of Shangri-La. It is a beautiful facility. It is in Maryland in the mountain ranges. It is defended by the United States Marine Corps and has enjoyed restricted airspace. This is where presidents can go and kind of leave the gateway that is the White House, the fishbowl, as it were, where they can enjoy some real privacy. And Ronald Reagan used to go horseback riding there. Matter of fact, when the Queen of England was here on a state visit, he actually took her riding when they were at Camp David, and the Queen seemed to enjoy it. Of course, this is a facility where two Middle East accords were brokered. One was Jimmy Carter, and the other one was Bill Clinton. Both were negotiated with both the representatives from Israel and Egypt, both staying, although in separate cabins, but coming together. And there's a beautiful conference room there where they came together to negotiate the accords, and that's where the accords were negotiated. Then ultimately they were signed on the south lawn of the White House. Of course, the picture on the right hand side over here, and again, I need to move that picture over just a little bit, is what we affectionately call the Beast. This is basically a car that is built on the frame of a truck. Although the exact weight specifications are not given out by the Secret Service because of security, it is estimated that this heavily armored car is probably anywhere between 15 to 20,000 pounds. That's my guesstimate, no others. You'll see sometimes when they open the back door to allow the president to get in there, get out, the door actually looks like the door that you would find on an aircraft. It's just that thick. It is self-contained. It has a myriad of security features, and this is what the president used to get from point A to point B. Now, it was interesting one time that in England, I believe it was when Barack Obama was president, because of the incline of where, I believe they were coming out of the American embassy, but there was an incline upward, and evidently because of the incline, it was so high that the Beast actually, the first part came across it, but the second half couldn't because it couldn't basically cross over. So they very hastily had to get the boss out of the Beast into, I believe it was a secure Suburban, and that's what they took to get him on his way. And then ultimately they got that Beast out of there. But that's the first time the Beast has been, quote unquote, stranded. But I remember watching that story. I'm like, oh man, someone's going to pay for that one. Okay. With this limo over here, this is the inauguration with Reagan. There's a rather unique story about this. You know, John Kennedy was in an open car when he was assassinated in Dallas, and afterwards, that very same limo, after it was taken back to Washington, D.C., was actually sent back to the security manufacturer. It's called Eisenholt, I believe, but it's in the Midwest. But they were in the business of building armored cars. And that very same vehicle was armored up. There were additional security specifications in there. But one of them was the fact that there was no longer going to be an open roof. I mean, that car was going to be armored. Well, the problem was that, and I know President Nixon fought the Secret Service on this. He got a car that had an open top for his inauguration, and same thing with Reagan. And I'm sure the Secret Service is like, oh, I mean, does anyone have any sense of memory? But unfortunately, you know, you only get inaugurated once, if you're lucky twice. And obviously you were taking in the moment. And clearly Reagan was taking in the moment. But if you notice, and if you watch the movie The Line of Fire with Clint Eastwood, he plays an older Secret Service agent that was on, quote unquote, the Kennedy detail. The way that you'll notice the agents, the way they have their hands on the car, that allows them to have a sense that if the car's making a turn, they can go, so they can stay focused on looking out in there. There's also a platform on the back where the agents can jump on, very similar to the platform that was on the Kennedy car. The Kennedy car is actually in the Ford Museum, and the specifications is that the Secret Service did not buy the car, but it leased it from Ford. Now, Kennedy was killed in a Continental. But obviously the Beast previously we saw are Cadillacs. So they tend to kind of go back and forth. But the whole idea is that the idea of a president being exposed with an open top. Now, that's not going to happen. Now, there is a way for the president to communicate. There is a loudspeaker system that he can do that. LBJ was very popular for using that. But, you know, presidents want to be close to the people, and it's the job of the Secret Service to keep him safe. But I'm sure this is something that they just fought tooth and nail to get rid of. And I think in the long term, I think it's probably the smartest thing they can do. Okay, let's talk about the Resolute Desk. Okay, the Resolute Desk has a very interesting history about it. It is a desk that is made out of the former timbers of HMS Resolute. That was a British explorer plane that was doing exploring in the upper Arctic, came upon a storm, was literally frozen in the ice, and the crew abandoned ship. Unfortunately, they never found the remains of the crew, but the ship remained basically locked in ice. Approximately 3 years later, as it was told, the American Navy came upon HMS Resolute, got the ship free, got it back into American waters, and then notified the British, we got your ship, please take your ship. Well, Queen Victoria had heard about what the Americans had done and was so impressed that when HMS Resolute was brought back to the United Kingdom, at some point it was dismantled. And as a thank you present to the United States government and to the president, she basically went and had this desk made and was given to I believe it was President Hayes. Now, various modern presidents have used it. John Kennedy used it. LBJ did not, I believe. Neither did Nixon. But it was brought back in a big way with Reagan, and I know Obama has used it. But the unique thing is that when the original desk was brought to the United States, there were two things that were not part of it originally. One of them was the centerpiece. Now, that wooden centerpiece in the middle that has the eagle looking towards the talons as opposed to the olive branches was actually constructed during the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The reason why is that he wanted to hide the fact that he sat in a wheelchair from the reporters that would be covering the White House. So if you remember in 1960 when John Kennedy was president, 1960s, I should say, is that there's a very adorable picture where John pokes his head out from the panel, and he's playing in his dad's office. Caroline is in the front, kind of doing her little calisthenic dance in front of it, and Kennedy is just kind of taking it all in. Now, there's a very unique story that when Jackie Kennedy was in the White House, she was very protective of the children. But when Jackie was away on some sort of official trip as First Lady, the president would call in his photographer, Cecil Mullins, I believe his name was, and it says, he would tell the nannies, bring the kids down to the Oval Office, and then Cecil would be there clicking off pictures, and that's what they gave to the press. Now, I'm sure that irritated the hell out of Jackie, but when you're away, what are you going to do? But there's a very adorable photo with John poking his head out from there. But the unique thing also is that there's the risers. Now, if you look on the bottom, and I'll kind of point them out with the mouse over here, is that you have two risers. When the Resolute desk, I should say, was brought to the White House, this riser did not exist. It was just this. And what happened is that Ronald Reagan was trying to use the desk, and he complained to the carpenters that he just couldn't use the desk because the top of the desk was always riding on the top of his legs. And it was a real irritant. He couldn't work at the desk very long. Well, the carpentry shop in the White House is actually located in one of the basements, and the story goes is that they said, yes, sir, Mr. President, we can fix this for you, and actually created this second riser, which they then fitted the desk upon, and that gave Reagan enough of that clearance so that he could stay at the desk and not have the top of his legs scrape the bottom desk drawer of the desk, as it were. It's a rather very impressive piece of furniture. It's approximately, I believe, 8 feet long by 5 feet wide. And if you go to any modern president's library that creates a reconstruction of the Oval Office, you'll always see a Resolute desk there. I had a chance to see it when I visited Bush 43's library at SMU. Again, very impressive on that. So real quick quiz, we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at both this is a picture of the Kennedy desk, and this is a picture of the Reagan desk. And outside of the chairs, I'll give you that. There are two separate chairs because each president can choose whichever type of chair. Tell me what's different about the desk. Well, okay, I'll give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, how many of you got it? Raise your hand. No, just kidding. Okay, look on the left-hand side, the phones. Look at the phones. Okay, Kennedy had a dial phone. Reagan had touch tone. And as you can see, this is the back part. You can see on the back part of the Resolute desk, but it's really quite beautiful. Now, if you, I forget the movie, it was National something. They did a franchise about it, that there's supposedly a secret drawer within the Resolute desk where the National Book of American Secrets are held there, you know. But the whole point is that it's really quite a beautiful desk. You can actually purchase a replica of the desk. I think there's a place called history.com that sells them, and it's like $8,000. I have no space in my current house, but if I certainly got a much larger home and I had a much larger office, I would entertain buying one, just for the pure sense of history. Now, for the blue chair for Kennedy, that is also a replica. You can actually buy a replica of both presidential chairs. There are places that sell that. But Kennedy had that special chair, and I promised myself that if I ever get working again, I mean steady, I'm going to buy a replica of that chair. I'm just going to splurge and buy it because I'm going to keep it for the rest of my life. But the whole point is that it needed to have the additional lumbar support for Kennedy's back, and so Kennedy worked with his physician at that point was a lady by the name of Dr. Janice Travell, and they worked with the furniture maker to create that chair. It's a very impressive chair. Reagan's chair, I don't want to say it's not so much impressive, but if you've ever looked, let's say, at President Trump, when he's sitting in the Oval Office, again, each president can pick and choose what type of chair he wants, and then obviously if he wants to buy the chair when he leaves office, he can. He has to pay a price to the General Service Administration, the GSA, because they're responsible for purchasing of furniture for the government. But it certainly can be done. The next thing I'd like to share with you, and this is something that's very personal with me, is this. These are 2 plaques. Geez, you know, when I set up these AVs, you'll have to forgive me. When I set up these AVs, I really do try to want to maximize the frame. So I hate doing this while I'm broadcasting, but you know, what the heck. Okay. So there are 2 separate plaques. This particular plaque, which I do have a replica on my own desk. This was actually on the desk of John Kennedy. And as you can see, it says simply, "Oh God, thy sea is so great, and my boat is so small." The other plaque was actually on Reagan's desk, which I also love as well. There's no limit of what a man can do or where he can go if he doesn't mind who gets the credit. And, you know, as a project and program manager, I pride myself on not being a credit hog. I learned this when I was in the Air Force. The very first day I was commissioned, I was confronted. Confronted is the wrong word, but there was a chief master sergeant I was very close with, and you know, there's so much that's happening on graduation day. You know, you have to get out, and you know, you're in your new uniform, and everybody's saluting you, and that's kind of nice. But you know, you don't get a chance really to say goodbye to certain people. And there's one chief master sergeant who I loved very dearly, gave me the best piece of career advice I have ever received, and he said this. He said, "Sir, just remember, credit is like a large Hershey bar. You can eat it by yourself and get a bad stomach ache, or you can break it and share it with your team, and then everyone gets to taste its sweetness." And for the love of God, I have never, ever forgotten that piece of advice, because it is so true. How many of us have actually worked with people that come in, there's the self-proclaimed, "I'm the smartest person in the room, you know, you just need to listen to me and all your problems will be done." I mean, really just like arrogant to the max, right? And you just go and you just, it really tries your sense of humanity sometimes. Well, with Kennedy being a former naval officer, the fact that he although he was a hero, his craft was destroyed because it got rammed by a Japanese destroyer. He lost 2 of his crewmen. They never recovered their bodies. He towed one of them with his teeth, even though he had the back injuries that he did. But the whole idea, and if you've ever been out to sea, I mean, I don't care. You can be on the largest ship that's ever made. You know, a U.S. aircraft carrier, one of these giant cruise ships. I'm not into cruising for a number of different reasons, but the whole point is that you can be on the biggest of ships, but if you're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and God forbid if something goes down, and you know you're not on a life, you don't have a life raft on, or you're going to see how big the Pacific Ocean really is, and how small you are in comparison. The other one, again, going back to Reagan, is the whole idea of credit. You know, credit, like power, is really a mirage. It really is. You can have power over someone. Let's say like a CEO, right? You're a CEO of a company. You obviously have what is known as position power. You have authority. But let's say you come in and let's say you had a really bad year and your board invites you to a special meeting in your boardroom, not your boardroom, the company boardroom, and then 5 minutes later, you're known as an ex-CEO. Well, you don't have the authority anymore. You don't have the position of power anymore. To some extent, your reputation is going to take a hit, right? Because if they wouldn't have fired you if you were, now sometimes decent people do get hurt. Don't get me wrong. But the whole idea is that you can go from one thing to another like that, right? So the whole point is that Reagan was politically astute. Now understand, he had to work with a legislature that was predominantly Democrat when he was elected as a Republican. And this was in the late 60s that he had to work within that environment. So he learned very quickly that it's not about getting the credit. It's about getting the job done, getting the legislation passed. And he got one of the biggest tax reforms in the state of California that ultimately saved the taxpayers over $2 billion. Now, good luck in this day and age as a Californian. But my point is this, is that if you go into a task knowing that it's not about getting the credit, but just getting the job done, I have a personal motto that I follow, which is praise in public, criticize in private. And what that means is simply this, is that if I'm leading a project or a program and things are going well, I'm letting everyone in the organization know how great my team is. Not how great I am, how great my team is. Now, if we have a problem, that's where the praise in public comes in. And the praise in public, criticize in private comes in. I'm going to deal with that person in a closed door, and we're going to figure something out. Now, it is surprisingly how much people pay at work. They're going through a divorce. They have, like in my case, I have a autistic child. I mean, there are 1,000 things that affect people's performance. But if you don't have the guts to be able to ask that person, hey, what's going on? I mean, and that's when you have to go. I was in the process one time that I was ordered to terminate a subordinate by my superior. Come to find out, there was extenuating, I don't want to identify the person by name, but the whole point is there were extenuating circumstances. I immediately stopped the conversation I had. I immediately engaged HR and got them involved, and we started working toward a solution. A day later, my supervisor called me into my office, or called me into his office, I should say, and said, what's the deal? I gave you a directive. You did not follow the directive. And I don't want to name this person's name either. I'll just use a term, Ray. Let's just use Ray as a pseudonym for his name. I said, Ray, yes, sir. You can order me to fire her. Sorry, didn't mean to say it was her, but fire this person. But if we do, here are the legal ramifications you are going to be facing. And I laid it out like 5 different things. I said, however, let us engage HR, and once HR is over and done with, then we can go ahead and we can proceed forward. Well, it worked. It worked. So the whole point is this, is that if you don't have the courage to go in and to address those issues and you do things improperly, you are going to pay severely for them. And I mean severely. In this day and age, in this current state of litigation fever, legal warfare, as President Trump has called it, the whole point is that there are better ways to get to solutions. And that's it. All right. So I wanted to go and talk about the White House, specifically the West Wing, because that's where the center of action is. Okay, so you see the Rose Garden is here. You have what is known as the Western Colonnade, which is where the president goes to. There is no direct entrance for the president to enter into the Oval inside the West Wing. If he did, he would have to go through the White House press office, the press briefing, and I'm sure there are certain days the president just does not want to meet the press, pardon the pun, in that way. So he'll exit from the West Colonnade. There are actually 4 doors to the Oval Office. There's one directly from the Colonnade. The second door will lead to the office of the President's Secretary. The third is directly into the corridor outside of the Oval. And then the fourth is to a private dining room and study that the President utilizes to have private luncheons. It is said this is where President Bush would have lunch with Dick Cheney once a week. But it affords the President a modicum of privacy above and beyond the Oval Office. As you can see, outside of the Oval, you have two of the most important, or really more important. You have the Roosevelt Room, which is a large conference room that can be used in addition, but then you have the Cabinet Room. The Cabinet Room was developed because we live by a presidential cabinet system as opposed to a parliamentary system where the head of the party is the head of state. Well, the president, as a head of his party, is head of state, but he is there because of his own election and not because the majority of his party got elected and then he was selected among his party to be the prime minister. So the president meets with the cabinet secretaries. So they're cabinet secretaries, Secretary of Justice, etc., Defense, the whole 9 yards. This is where they meet when the president wants to meet with them. In addition, you have the Chief of Staff office, currently that's occupied by Ms. Wiles, who actually was the daughter of sports broadcaster and former giant Pat Summerall. Ms. Wiles is actually his daughter. You also have an office for the vice president, although the vice president's ceremonial office is actually in the Eisenhower building, which is that large Gothic building that's immediately adjacent to the West Wing. But he does have an official office within the West Wing, and then obviously there. So then as we go, this is on the first floor, but now let's go to the other floor where it's happening, and that is here in the ground floor. And again, you can see there's a stairway up here that comes, again, the press offices, but then there's a stairway, and then the president can descend. So you can see over here, this is really where it's happening in the ground floor, which is called the Situation Room. Now, originally it was called the International Situation Room. It was developed by John Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis as a way of him being able to coordinate all of the intelligence that he was receiving, not only from the CIA, but from the Department of Defense as well as the State Department. But it was revamped recently, although it was also revamped by President Bush. The Situation Room by itself is 5,000 square feet. There are briefing rooms, there are video conference rooms in there, but the whole point is that this is where the President of the United States guides our nation from crisis through crisis. You can also see that there is a Navy mess and kitchen. That's where staffers in the White House can go and get something to eat if they can't leave the building, and I'm sure there are plenty of times when they simply can't, but they need to be fed like everyone else. Again, you can see there's various offices in there, but this is really between the Oval and the Situation Room. I mean, this is where the president lives out, his presidency for that. So once again, I'm telling you, this mouse has got a lot to be desired. I think this mouse is up for retirement. Okay, here is a picture of the Situation Room. Over here, as we said before, the president is on one end. You can see all these people are identified over here. It has a huge, there are 4 flat panel TV built, embedded in there. As you can see, the person on the left-hand side right here, the CJCS is Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's currently an Air Force 4-star general. And then OSD is the Office of Secretary of Defense, and that is Lloyd Austin from there. But this is the large conference room. As if you've ever watched the movie The West Wing, it seems like the president was always in and out of the Situation Room. But that's where he operates out of. Over here, this is my semi-personal story. If you remember when we were conducting the raid on Osama bin Laden, this particular photograph was released by the White House to show how the president was monitoring the situation as it went down. Now, as you can see, you have then Vice President Biden is here, President Obama is here, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mike Mullins is here. You have Secretary of Defense Bill Gates is right here. Hillary is here. That was his chief, or over here, that's his chief of staff over here. This, I think, was the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, I believe. His face is so familiar, I can't remember. But this little dude over here is Anthony Blankenship. Now, Anthony Blankenship was a White House staffer to the vice president, who then later became Secretary of State. And over here, this gentleman was the head of the CIA over here. I forget his name. And then, of course, Hillary is here. Now, the problem with this photo is two forms. One was when this photo was released within the Arabic countries, Hillary was airbrushed out. This and this young lady, the women were airbrushed out. Evidently, it was Arabic sensitivities that women were not in the same places as men, and therefore they airbrushed out. And, of course, this caused a huge uproar because it was kind of tampering with history. I mean, she was there because she was the Secretary of State at the time. But this one-star general over here was a gentleman by the name of Brad Hall. Brad was actually a classmate of mine at the academy. He later became a 3-star general. His specialty was special operations. He was actually originally a helicopter pilot. That's how we got into, and he did our country and our class extremely well. There's only one other flag officer that came out of my class, a gentleman by the name of Arnold Bunch. Arnie and I were actually freshmen together. Arnie was from Tennessee, a real nice guy. He had a Tennessee accent as wide as the Mississippi, but just a great guy. But Arnie eventually became a 4-star general. And once again, let me take this off here to personally salute you, Arnie. And Brad, thank you so much for serving our country and serving our class so well. All right, so now moving over. One of the perks about being president is you get identified. There's only been 45 men. There have been 2 men that have served non-consecutive terms. That was Grover Cleveland as the 22nd and the 24th president of the United States. And, of course, Donald Trump as being the 45th and the 47th. Now, as you can see over here, it starts here with Washington. You can kind of move your way through. Some would argue who were the worst presidents. I know Bill O'Reilly has actually written a book on this, and he concurs that that the number 15, James Buchanan, who was president from 1947 to 1961, basically was the worst because he let what would have been the start of the Civil War fester. He didn't want to deal with it, although he was from Pennsylvania, I believe, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I believe. He actually sided with the South and basically said, no, the slaves are theirs, and there should be no federal intervention, and as long as I'm president, it's not going to happen. Of course, when Lincoln was elected, part of the premise was that if Abe Lincoln was elected president, that the South would start to succeed. Well, lo and behold, he is inaugurated on March 4th, 1861, and by the 15th of April, Fort Sumter is being fired upon by the rebels. Eventually, it was surrendered, and it was the first major victory for the Confederacy. And obviously, now Lincoln had to deal with it because now we have a civil war. So, the whole idea, but some would also argue that 14 did not do very well, and that was Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce was originally from Vermont, I believe, a very melancholy man. both him and his wife. He was, some would say, a borderline alcoholic. He actually lost one of his children on the way to being inaugurated. Either fell off a stagecoach or something like that, but one of the children, of course, his wife and him had to deal with that. And as a result, he drank. I mean, he drank, as we'd say, he drank like a fish. So between those two presidents side by side did not do us very great credit. And unfortunately, that burden led to Abraham Lincoln, who some would say was the greatest president. So I think what Bill is trying, and again, not to presume for Bill, but I think Bill makes a very powerful case that, the best and the worst were literally side by side from the 14th through the 16th presidencies of the United States. All right. One of the things that you get as a perk of being president is you get your own portrait. This was a kind of a schematic, and these are all the official portraits of the United States presidency. Of course, even with Grover Cleveland right here, you only get one presidential portrait. So that's why we see him here. But one portrait, even though two presidencies, only one portrait. I think the presidential portrait that has probably caused the most controversy, believe it or not, was the one for John Kennedy. Now, of course, John Kennedy never lived to see his portrait being done, and the portrait that did both Kennedys, both Jack and Jackie's, was the same person. But the guidance that he received from Jacqueline was she wanted Jack to appear contemplative. And so that's why the downward motion with the crossed arms, just to be seen as being now. Some of Jack's friends objected to this. They said that's not really Jack. But through time, Jackie has been proven right. It is probably one of the most popular portraits in the presidential series. And because he was martyred, because he is forever young in our minds, but it is a very popular portrait. Now, another thing, I don't know if you've noticed, but in the frequent changes to the Oval, Ronald Reagan's portrait is now in the Oval Office. Typically, there would be a small portrait of Andrew Jackson in the Oval, but the full Reagan portrait is now in the Oval. And that is very interesting because that was also a very popular portrait that was, as per people that went on the White House tour. But Ronald Reagan is now closer to the presidency than while he was in president. So the other thing is the official portrait for Barack Obama and Michelle Obama has yet to be revealed. Now, traditionally what would happen is that the current president would invite the former presidents back. The portraits would be revealed to the public and then would be on display in the White House. That has yet to take place. And I know that there were a lot of harsh words said between the Obamas and the Trumps. Obama's famous quip was he could guarantee that Donald Trump will never be president of the United States. Well, unfortunately, that did happen. And, of course, there was a controversy that Trump had with President Obama's birth certificate. But when the two men did meet face-to-face, they did have a cordial meeting. President Trump had indicated that he looked forward to meeting with Mr. Obama. Mr. Obama still lives in Washington, D.C., though. He did not go back to Chicago. He stayed in the action. And some would say that he had a deliberate effect on Mr. Biden's presidency. Well, we'll just leave it at that. But we certainly await for his and Michelle's official portrait to be somehow displayed in the White House. Okay. Over here, these are I qualify these as the posters that we saw in our, middle school class. Certainly, I remember when I was in there, Richard Nixon was president, so John Kennedy, etc. This one has the qualifications for president that you have to be a natural-born citizen of the United States. You cannot be naturalized. So, sorry, Arnold, you can't be a president of the United States. There's some controversy about John McCain because I believe he was born in Manila, but his father was an active duty naval officer, and because he had been born on a naval base, he was technically an American on U.S. soil because military installations are an extension of U.S. property, as it were, and therefore he was a U.S. citizen. And then, of course, the oath of office, which I swore myself into for the duration of this video. Unfortunately, that'll be hard giving it up, but I will do it for the American people. This is a picture at the time that was taken of the living presidents. Of course, two of them are no longer with us. That is Bush 41 over here on the left as you're looking at it, and then, of course, Jimmy Carter on the right. Carter was our oldest living president, actually reaching the tender age of 100 years old. And, of course, his beloved wife passed away 2 years earlier. She died at 98. So, therefore, the oldest living president right now actually falls to W, I believe. So, from that standpoint, because Trump, although he's currently 78, is now current president. If Trump had not been reelected, he would have been the eldest former president, but now he is back as president. So I believe that I believe that maybe Clinton now is the eldest. I think Clinton's got a couple of years on Bush, not by much, but they're in that same cohort. Over here, this is an image of John Kennedy that I'm both fond of and mourn at the same time. For those of you who remember the movie JFK, this was actually a brief, not a scene, but a clip in the movie. And it shows John Kennedy being almost solemn, like he's praying, he's in the act of prayer somehow, and the weight of the office is just bearing down on his shoulders. That very well may be, but in actuality, what was probably happening in this particular shot was the president was reading a lot of the newspapers. Now, John Kennedy prided himself on his ability to read rapidly and with a high level of comprehension. It was estimated that the president said that he could read 1,200 words a minute with a comprehension rate of over 90%, which is really quite spectacular. He was a voracious reader. He read the newspapers, he read books. He kept himself constantly appraised of what was going on. And as a president, that's what you need to do. But clearly the method of today was, but the one thing that he didn't read a lot of was the presidential briefing. The presidential daily brief actually had to be redesigned under Kennedy so that he literally could go and it could fit on a couple of sheets of paper. He could fold it and fit it in his jacket. For some strange reason, John Kennedy did not like receiving intelligence briefings. So they had to redo the presidential briefing. Now it's kind of the consistency of a small binder. It consists more like a series of articles that are drafted every day between the CIA and the FBI, and then it is brought in. Typically, it may be briefed in person or simply given to the president for him to read at his leisure. It was said that the Bush 41 or Bush 43 was not a big believer in the presidential brief, that it really took a lot to get him to read the book, as it was referred to. So, but in this particular it's mournful in the sense that if John Kennedy had lived, again, he is forever young in our minds, but the fact that he's just bowed over. Now, of course, Kennedy suffered from numerous physical ailments, bad back being one of them as a result of PT-109, among other things. But the fact of the matter is that he had several back surgeries, and they didn't go, not all of them were successful. So he could not sit for very long in a seat. He actually had to be almost, I don't want to say tranquilized, but he needed a special treatment for him to be able to sit in a chair for a long period of time. It was rumored that Khrushchev knew about this before they met in Vienna, and as a result, Khrushchev made it a point to keep Kennedy almost like feeling his pain while they were in their 4 separate sessions between the U.S. and the Soviet embassies in Vienna. But regardless, John Kennedy, it was barely 1,000 days, but he did what he could. And so I look at this picture with both with respect and a sense of mourning of what could have been. All right, moving right along, and we are getting close to this brief. Before we get started, this is a movie thing. This is kind of a clip with all the American presidents, and it is being sung to Hail to the Chief. I found this online. I found this really great. So we'll play this real quick. Okay, just a couple more facts before we go and sign off for today. There is always a discussion about who was the youngest president, and we have to make a distinction. The youngest president at the time he assumed the presidency was actually Theodore Roosevelt. I believe he was 41 years old when President McKinley was assassinated as a result of being shot at the Pan American Fair in Buffalo, New York. The youngest president inaugurated after winning the election was John Kennedy. He was 43 years old because he was 46 when he died in Dallas in November of 1963. That's the distinction that we make between the two young men who assumed the presidency. Another thing real quick about the presidency is there was the term in the Constitution about acting president and the whole 25th Amendment. When William Henry Harrison, who died after only 30 days in office as a result of contracting pneumonia, he gave one of the longest inaugural speeches. It was like 2 hours in the driving rain, and as a result, he caught pneumonia, and he died 30 days into his presidency. Well, when John Tyler took over, some people would thought that he should be addressed as the acting president because he had not been elected. But it was John Tyler that said, no, I am the president. I was inaugurated, I was sworn in as the president. I am the president of the United States. Now, when John Kennedy was assassinated, there was the whole kerfuffle about Lyndon Johnson, taking the oath of office on Air Force One. Technically, he did not, because once the Constitution is really quite clear that once the president dies in office, he is the president of the United States. And the fact of the matter was, so going forward, there should be no doubt that, God forbid, if something happens to our current president, that he dies in office, the vice president is in fact. Now, Harry Truman took the oath of office when FDR died. Johnson did the same thing after Kennedy. But my understanding is that there's no requirement to. You have been sworn in by virtue of your office. Now, because of the 25th Amendment, the process of how do we replace vice presidents, very quickly, vice presidents have to be nominated. If the office of vice president is vacated, as what happened with Spiro Agnew, because he resigned because he was being prosecuted for tax evasion and taking bribes. Thank you, Spiro. But what happened was the office of vice president was vacated. Now, the office of vice president had been vacated during numerous administrations, including Johnson. Johnson did not have a vice president. So, God forbid, if something should have happened to Johnson, the next person would have been the Speaker of the House, which was John McCormick, I believe. So, with the passage of the 25th Amendment, what happens is that the president will nominate a candidate, as Nixon did with Ford. Ford had to be confirmed by 2/3 of both the House and the Senate. Once that had been done, then he could be sworn in as the valid vice president. And then, as we saw, when Richard Nixon resigned the office, Ford could take over. Now, Ford has the distinction that he is the only president that was not elected to the presidency. But constitutionally, he is president, or was president, because the Constitution stipulated that there was a valid process to go through. Excuse me. So then, by virtue of being vice president, he became president. He lost to Jimmy Carter, and then Carter then lost to Reagan, and as I said, the story goes on. All right, so we're running a little bit late, but here's my closing comment. You may have seen this photo before if you watch my videos. That's me. That was May 30th, 1984, in Falcon Stadium at the United States Air Force Academy. The gentleman that you see immediately to the right, you couldn't see his face. That gentleman's name was Bobby Avila. Bobby recently passed away, and Bobby had played football for Air Force all 4 years. A great guy. I miss Bobby tremendously. He was such a big guy, but he had a great smile. Just a great person to be around. So, as I affectionately say, Bobby is leading the way as he always did. And my 10 seconds with the president consisted of two things. Me saying, Mr. President, I'm so glad that you're here, and my parents are glad that you're here. Mr. Reagan said to me, are they both Republicans? I said, yes, sir, they are. And they are going to vote for you in the fall. And he kind of gave me this little wink and shook my hand, and off I went. That is my touchstone with history. Of course, Ronald Reagan could be argued that he is one of the greatest presidents that we've had in recent history. Brought the U.S. military back to a position of power and predominance. Unfortunately, he did it at the result of deficit spending. Reagan believed in a balanced budget but never submitted one. But he believed in the concept of peace through strength. I later got to be stationed in Europe and saw that play out when Muammar Gaddafi went and bombed a discotheque because Reagan had been going after him. Gaddafi retaliated. We retaliated against Gaddafi. We did not kill Gaddafi in that raid. We ended up killing, I believe, one of his grandchildren, however, and then Gaddafi re-retaliated, as it were, by placing a bomb on a Pan Am 747 that exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland, 90 days before I was supposed to get out, and I had to fly back to the United States on a Pan Am jet. Not one of my better aviation experiences, trust me, but that's the way international politics gets played out. But, Mr. President, once again, I want to say thank you and salute you. May you be with your beloved Nancy. May you be smiling and riding horses into the everlasting sunset that is heaven, sir. So, for the rest of you, I hope that you're enjoying these videos. I enjoy making them. I'm actually going to do one tomorrow about Social Security. I think that you may find interesting. But this was one that I should have had done and posted yesterday for President's Day, a day late. But that old expression, day late and a dollar short, well, I'm a day late and I'm probably a dollar short. So, again, thank you all. Enjoy your day, and we'll see you tomorrow.